Bismillah. If anything I say brings you good or beneficial understanding, this is from Allah. And if I say anything wrong, it's from my own mistakes and shortcomings. So it's my hope that through this presentation, you will begin to see and recognize the archetypes and energies working within you more clearly. My goal is to bring an easily overcomplicated psychological concept into a more accessible form that's easy to digest. When we understand how our psyche works, we can then do something about it and use it more consciously and more competently in our lives. We will be able to make better decisions and accept the reality of the circumstances we find ourselves in without compromising our integrity or agency as valuable human beings. And what's even more relevant to that is for this day and age to not shame ourselves for being human. Sometimes we really are caught between a rock and a hard place, and it doesn't mean that we're incompetent or we're losing control. It just means that life is challenging at times, and that's by design. So, what are Jungian archetypes? I'm going to start off with how it sounds in complicated language, simply because this is Jung's definition, and then I'll break it down. In Volume 9, Part 1 of the Collected Works, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Carl Gustav Jung writes, "The concept of the archetype, which is an indispensable correlate of the idea of the collective unconscious, indicates the existence of definite forms in the psyche, which seem to be present always and everywhere." So in layman's terms, that means that these forms within the mind have consistent patterns among all people. These forms are energies which influence our behavior unconsciously or consciously, depending upon our awareness of them. So, for example, many of us have an instinctual idea of a hero. We've all watched the Walt Disney movies. He's someone who's brave, who faces a challenge to protect others. This hero image is a common pattern or archetype that we all recognize and that influences how we see certain people or stories as inspiring. There have been several attempts to capture archetypal images that have been passed down throughout history through stories, myths, and religious symbolism. Today, enthusiasts and professionals of depth psychology are reaching a point in their exploration where a structure of these archetypes is being uncovered and better understood. So they no longer become just forms, but structural components of a psychic whole. Until now, the following models that we're going to look at in the next two slides by Tony Wolff and Robert Moore have given the most comprehensive understanding of what that structure looks like in the psyche. So, this is Tony Wolff's model. Tony Wolff was at first Jung's patient and then mistress and protege, and finally an independent Jungian analyst. You'll notice that Tony's work quite frequently resorts to making everything a focus on a man or a certain role within the feminine's relationships. And back then, this was pretty much the extent of what women could do given their place in society. What she was doing with Jung offered her an opportunity to use more quote-unquote masculine archetypes because he allowed that expression as a means to further her own development and contribute to his study of depth psychology over their 40-plus years relationship. She continued to run the Psychology Club of Zurich as the elected president even after their romantic relationship ended. So here, this is the model from the Structural Forms of the Feminine Psyche. So here on the left-hand side, you can see that she outlined the archetypes of the mother, Hetaira, as personally related. She left it off, and I'll explain that why in just a second. And the Amazon and medial woman as impersonally related. She also claimed that these four archetypes corresponded with the male anima. There is a book called Four Eternal Women that expanded on her essay. You can see it over here on the right-hand side. And I included this model just because it makes it more clear graphically that the mother and Hetaira are personally related. For some reason, she left that part out on her essay, but what I assume is that it could have just been because when you're using a typewriter back then, that vertical line wasn't really possible. So, however, upon closer inspection, it appears that Wolff may have projected a structured psyche onto her understanding of these archetypes, and quite possibly her own. This implies that each core archetype can embody both personal and impersonal dynamics. What she most likely means by personally related is that the expression is internally focused, whereas the impersonal collective expression is more externally focused. And this is made more clear by looking at her axes. So the mother archetype, which is represented by the thinking function, and I'll explain that later, is a personal function. Yet it is on an axis with the Hetaira function, which is represented by the intuitive function. So her model, just to repeat, that we have a T function on an axis with an N function. In typology, thinking is a rational function or a judging function, and intuition is an irrational function or perceiving function. The Myers-Briggs team updated that nomenclature to be more clear and accessible because irrational could be misinterpreted as lacking reason or logic. And just again, irrational means perceiving functions, rational means judging functions. And I'm explaining it now because in order to understand John Beebe's work, we have to understand those concepts. So, however, what we know of typology is that thinking is on an axis with feeling, not intuition. So, and likewise, for her impersonally related archetypes, the medial woman, represented by feeling, is a judging function, and the Amazon, represented by sensation, is a perceiving function. So what she has mapped out is a structure of a specific psyche, as she has correctly identified in structural forms that, and I'm quoting here, this is her development. She says, as a rule, one form is the predominant one and may be joined by another, while the third and fourth are at first unconscious and can be made conscious and integrated only with difficulty and during the later part of life. She also said, similar to the four basic psychological functions, all the four structural forms are inherent to every woman. If possible, she will realize the one which is most consistent with her nature. By and by, a second form will assert itself from within. This process, too, runs parallel to the gradual differentiation of the four basic functions. Consequently, for the mother, for instance, this second form will be the Amazon or the medial woman. The personal relationship is thus joined by an impersonal one, or vice versa, by a personal one in the case of an initially impersonally related woman, unquote. So when I saw that, I noticed, oh, hey, this sounds similar to what John Beebe was mentioning in his developmental process. So he agrees with this developmental understanding. In his book, Energies and Patterns, he writes, Jung found that for all the types met with in practice, the rule holds good that besides the conscious primary function, there is a relatively unconscious auxiliary function, which is in every respect different from the nature of the primary function. Since he also believed that naturally these functions can appear as auxiliary, whose nature is not opposed to the dominant function, feeling, for instance, can never act as the second function alongside thinking, nor sensation alongside intuition. Rather, if respect to differentiation, someone's first or superior function is on the rational axis, i.e., either thinking or feeling, then that individual's auxiliary function will have to come from the irrational axis, be either sensation or intuition, unquote. So hopefully that makes sense as to why this is a specific structure of a psyche, her model, and it is not a model, a core model for just archetypes. So this is a specific psyche that she has described. And we're going to move on to Robert's model. And just a reminder, everything is going to be here in the presentation notes. So if you have any questions about it, there will be a Q&A at the end. And I have written everything down because I can't remember anything either. So all these notes that if you're a person that needs to see it like me, then they will be written down for you. So, moving on to Robert Moore's model gives us a better look at what Tony Wolff meant by saying that the feminine archetypal structure corresponds to the male anima. what you see on the slide is what Moore called the diamond body. This octahedron shape is also derived from Jung's understanding of the quaternio and double quaternio structures of the human self in Volume 9, Part 2 of the Collected Works, which is also known as Ion. You can see how the anima is a shadow of the masculine structure and the animus is a shadow of the feminine structure. If you don't know what anima and animus are, the anima is considered the feminine aspect of the masculine psyche, and the animus is considered the masculine aspect of the feminine psyche. I love Robert Moore's work because he was such a great storyteller. Like if you get a chance to listen to his YouTube videos, it's very entertaining. And he brought the archetypes to life in their embodiments within the psyche, especially the masculine psyche. He's just a treasure trove of information and resources. His explanation of how the masculine and feminine are structured is found in a great lecture. It's about 4 hours long, but you would type into YouTube Robert Moore for couples within, and it should pull it up. The link is also in the resources category in the YouTube depth psychology section down at the bottom of the server. And the link is also going to be here in the presentation notes. So to sum up that lecture and explain what's on the slide, what Robert Moore believed is that there were 4 royal couples within the psyche of the human being: the king and queen, the warrior couple, the magician couple, and the lovers. So there are 4 core archetypes, but a masculine and feminine component to each of them. When we're captivated by the stories that get passed down, what happens is different levels of consciousness lend us our ability to discern specific functions from others, and specific traits get conflated with cultural understandings. So for instance, the magician and medial woman are heavily conflated with intuition, but they are actually a part of the feeling function. That's not to say that these archetypes don't also use intuition. That's just where it starts to get confusing for most people. So Robert Moore was not a typologist, but if he were, he probably would have realized very soon that the shadows of the archetypes of the mature masculine are none other than the binary aspects of each cognitive function. And I will go into the shadows and their underfunctioning after the new year, inshallah. But I want to give myself more time to study and put these things together so I can actually spend time on the server and visit with everyone instead of being offline so much. So Moore seems to take a more societal or collective approach to developing the archetypes through rites of initiation, but he did notice one developmental feature of men and women. And this is a quote from his website. The differing time scales of male and female development are found at the axis between the lover and the warrior. Young females are flooded with lover energy in adolescence, while young males are flooded with warrior energy at the same time. However, men and women pass each other at midlife on this axis. This is the source of so many divorces and so much intergender misunderstanding. Just as the woman at midlife is powering up into her aggression, her warrior, a man, is discovering the opening of his heart or his lover. They pass each other in the night, literally pass each other in the night. Unquote. So, because of what we know of human development, this trend is a generalization. It's not an absolute. There are effeminate boys and there are tomboyish girls. What I believe Moore was picking up on is that in earlier life, males tend to prefer their masculine expressions, and young females prefer their feminine expressions, as a generalization. Then what happens is later in life, when people are at the stage of developing their contrasexual elements, there is a compensatory effect which tends to balance things out. Though at first it might upset the hitherto order of things, which leads to the divorce that he was talking about. So, a man gets more in touch with connecting to others, while women, after having raised children and put most people and relationships above herself, are looking for more independence. The reality of this shift is not only felt by spouses, but by children when their parents become grandparents, that they've softened in their old age. And this can create its own set of reflections for adult children when they witness the contrast between the parent they grew up with and the grandparent they are now. So what I've done, after realizing that Moore's work substantiated Tony Wolff's model, is I updated the nomenclature to be more easily understood and capture what I think is a more accurate picture of the archetypes themselves. So just to recap, Moore claimed in his lecture tapes that the masculine and feminine contained 4 royal couples: king and queen, male and female warriors, male and female magicians, and the lovers. He also claimed that the father is a part of the king archetype. What this implies logically is that the mother is part of the queen archetype. In regard to Wolff's model, mother corresponds to Moore's queen, Amazon corresponds to Moore's female warrior, the medial woman corresponds to Moore's female magician, and the hetaira corresponds to Moore's lover. So now we have the king and queen, and mother is out because it's a part of queen. I like Amazon, and it gives a clear picture of a warrior woman who is no less a warrior, but is more wild and free than the warrior depiction of a strict, disciplined, and stoic knight of medieval time. And you'll see later how this corresponds to sensation. So I kept warrior and Amazon because they are easily recognizable, and I didn't see enough of a reason to justify changing Wolff's model. Magician is quite limited in scope and only embodies a certain type of mediator between conscious and unconscious realms. In Tony Wolff's model, the medial term gets closer, but it doesn't imply competency. Someone can be a medial person and bring the unconscious to consciousness, but only as a medium. There's also an occult element that pigeonholes both of those terms. So the overarching theme of bringing the unconscious to conscious is wisdom and empathy. People can share information and even attain esoteric insight, but there is a time, a place, and an etiquette on how to do so, without the need to involve magic. For this reason, and because of the wisdom necessary to understand what can and should be brought to consciousness, I've renamed those archetypes the wise man and wise woman. Regarding Wolff's hetaira archetype, this alludes to a certain role that women play specifically in regard to men. And as I mentioned before, much of her work is based or biased in that way. The lover archetypes, masculine and feminine, are so much more than just limited to a primary relationship. For this reason, I went with Moore's term lover for both the masculine and feminine. And what we have now are the king and queen, the warrior and the Amazon, the wise man and the wise woman, and the lovers. So now we're building up to how it all ties together. What else has 4 archetypes with binary shadows? Our 4 modes of consciousness: intuition, sensing, feeling, and thinking. What Moore didn't realize is that in his books, the shadows of his masculine archetypes corresponded to an imbalance and shadowy aspect of typology's 8 cognitive functions model, with 4 conscious functions making up the ego and 4 unconscious functions making up the shadow. Each archetype in its fullness represents a proper balancing of the introverted and extroverted qualities to move from immaturity into a mature psychic wholeness. How we derived masculine and feminine from introverted and extroverted is what we're going to look at now. So everybody probably knows Fib, and if you don't, his name is Noah Likens. Last year, Noah Likens proposed UCT, which is Universal Compatibility Theory, a part of which stated that the masculine functions were introverted and the feminine functions were extroverted. He uses order versus chaos as justification for why SI is masculine and SE is feminine. But he relates SI to competence, which is false. Proper use of SI can lead to competence, but it in itself is not competence. Competence in each function comes from the balancing of extroverted and introverted orientations. Stereotypes and Heuristics can help us understand what is traditionally understood as masculine and feminine, but it does not define or explain why they are masculine and feminine to begin with. So I give Noah credit for an excellent insight into which functions are masculine and which ones are feminine. However, now we need to prove it and explain just exactly why that is, because otherwise we will miss the entire point of these complementary forces. We could also potentially mischaracterize what is a feminine trait and what is a masculine trait, and there will be an example of that later. But even worse, we could potentially falsely assume and perpetuate the patriarchal claim that men are more competent than women. So that's what we're going to look at now. This first piece of evidence is from John Beebe's book, Energies and Patterns in Psychological Type. He's explaining what the introverted functions and extroverted functions mean according to Jung. These orientations align with the stereotypical feminine and masculine expressions. So I'm just going to read a part of this. In Psychological Types, Jung states that the extrovert is distinguished by his craving for the object, his empathy and identification with the object, his voluntary dependence on the object. He is influenced by the object in the same degree as he strives to assimilate it. So when I read that, I was like, oh, you can see my note there. I put, this is so similar to the feminine expression. Continuing on, by contrast, the introvert is distinguished by his self-assertion vis-a-vis the object. He struggles against any dependence on the object. He repels all its influences and even fears it. So much the more is he dependent on the idea, which shields him from external reality and gives him the feeling of inner freedom, though he pays for this with a very noticeable power psychology. And when I read that, I was like, oh, this is similar to the masculine expression. So I'm not going to read the second panel, but the main takeaway here is that the feminine extroverted expression is distinguished by its dependence on and identification with the object. And the masculine or introverted expression is distinguished by independence and differentiation from the object. And what's important to note here beyond the descriptions of masculine and feminine is that they are found in each person. But because each function takes a different position within the psyche, its degree of consciousness and development will be different depending upon where it is located in the cognitive stack. So if we suppose that masculine is introverted and feminine is extroverted, we also need to attempt to explain why. What makes an archetype depend on and identify with an object rather than seek independence from it? Nancy Chodorow is a sociologist and a psychoanalyst. Her work in gender studies gives a compelling justification for why men tend to be masculine and women tend to be feminine using the circumstances of development in early childhood. So I'm going to read this part and then part of the next slide. So, mothers tend to experience their daughters as more like and continuous with themselves. Correspondingly, girls tend to remain part of the dyadic, primary, mother-child relationship itself. This means that a girl continues to experience herself as involved in issues of merging and separation, and in an attachment characterized by primary identification and the fusion of identification and object choice. By contrast, mothers experience their sons as a male opposite. Boys are more likely to have been pushed out of the pre-Oedipal relationship and to have had to curtail their primary love and sense of empathetic tie with their mother. A boy has engaged and been required to engage in a more emphatic individuation and a more defensive firming of experienced ego boundaries. Issues of differentiation have become intertwined with sexual issues. This does not mean that women have weaker ego boundaries than men or are more prone to psychosis. Disturbances in the early relation to a caretaker have equally profound effects on each, but these effects differ according to gender. The earliest mode of individuation, the primary construction of the ego and its inner object world, the earliest conflicts and the earliest unconscious definitions of self, the earliest threats to individuation, and the earliest anxieties, all which call up defenses, all differ for boys and girls because of the differences in the character of the early mother-child relationship for each. Girls emerge from this period with a basis for empathy built into their primary definition of a self in a way that boys do not. Girls emerge with a stronger basis for experiencing another's needs or feelings as one's own, or of thinking that one is so experiencing another's needs and feelings. Furthermore, girls do not define themselves in terms of the denial of the pre-Oedipal relational modes to the same extent as do boys. Therefore, regression to these modes tends not to feel as much a basic threat to their ego. From very early then, because they are parented by a person of the same gender, a person who has already internalized a set of unconscious meanings, fantasies, and self-images about this gender and brings to her experience her own internalized early relationship to her own mother, girls come to experience themselves as less differentiated than boys, as more continuous with and related to the external object world, and as differently oriented to their inner object world as well. Those are a lot of words. What it means is that due to girls seeing themselves as similar to their mothers, they tend to enmesh and identify with people, objects, and ideas in their external world as they play out their familiar method of relating to things. Boys, on the other hand, realize their tangible differences from their mother much sooner and seek to determine who they are apart from others through differentiation, and this becomes their primary way of relating. It makes sense then if a girl has difficulty attaching to her mother, or if a primary caretaker was someone other than the mother, the possibilities for feminine and masculine expressions will vary. This is the point where attachment theory intersects with psychological type. We won't go into that now, but it looks like it plays a major role in the pathologies of the binary shadows of each mode of consciousness. Those consciousnesses are intuition, sensation, thinking, and feeling. So, Carol Gilligan, she's the author of In a Different Voice. It's a very good book, but trigger warning, it talks about the differences of making a decision on an abortion, the way the women make a moral choice and men make a moral choice. But she sums it up again much more succinctly. So I'm including an excerpt from her work as a piece of corroborating evidence. So, for boys and men, separation and individuation are critically tied to gender identity, since separation from the mother is essential for the development of masculinity. For girls and women, issues of femininity or feminine identity do not depend on the achievement of separation from the mother, or on the progress of individuation. Since masculinity is defined through separation, while femininity is defined through attachment, male gender identity is threatened by intimacy, while female gender identity is threatened by separation. Thus, males tend to have difficulty with relationships, while females tend to have problems with individuation. So, as you can probably imagine, a person's relationship and attachment with their primary caregivers is very important for a secure sense of self that's grounded in balancing of masculine and feminine energies. I want to move on now to the fundamental Jungian understanding of the masculine and feminine principles. So, as I've mentioned before, the main challenge of defining masculine and feminine properties is separating the stereotypes from the essence. So, for example, Eros is a mythological male god figure. However, it's used to denote femininity. So we have to separate conflations between the lover archetype and the underlying masculine and feminine principles. Eros and Logos, which is similar to yin and yang, describe a sense of a primary preference and a little dot of its opposite. That visual representation is true of how masculine and feminine typically complement each other, but that's circumstantial and not an identification of the underlying definition. On the slide, you can see one-word definitions that capture the essence of each orientation. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to give you a few fundamental definitions from various experts in Jungian psychology. And that's where these words were derived from, in addition to the evidence we've already looked at in the previous slides. So, Marion Woodman writes in her book, Leaving My Father's House, Eros, principle of relatedness. John Beebe, in Energies and Patterns, writes Eros, that forms the basis for human relatedness. Marie-Louise von Franz, she said in 1986 in her last speech, Logos, which brings a necessary distance to the way we relate to others. Jung, in Archetypes and the Unconscious, writes, this is the paternal principle, the Logos, which eternally struggles to extricate itself. Eros is connective, and Logos is attributed to discrimination. This last quote was from Jung in Ion. Esther Harding wrote the book The Way of All Women. She was a colleague of Jung. Jung actually wrote the introduction to that book. She says that the realm of Eros, where she creates relationship. Marie-Louise von Franz, in her book Archetypal Dimensions of the Psyche, she writes, but the feminine principle seeks more the reconciliation than the polarization of the opposites. So those are several quotes that give you an idea of what they mean by the masculine principle and the feminine principle. And that polarized mindset is where most people start out. It's black and white. It's us against them. Polarity often means division or separation into opposing sides. And that's what we see here, masculine and feminine, Eros and Logos, extroverted and introverted, polarities. However, as a person matures, they ideally move beyond either-or thinking into a both-and perspective. This shift reflects cognitive integration, balancing the tension of the opposites, as Marion Woodman would say, where we are no longer competing against others or internally divided. Instead, we are operating in harmony with reality. This integrative approach fosters psychic wholeness. So based on all this information and an understanding of cognitive types as explained by John Beebe and Jung, we can now attribute specific functions to well-known structural archetypes within the psyches of human beings. And that's what we'll turn to now. I'm going to get a drink, actually. So, until now, I'm not aware of anyone who has been able to identify specific cognitive functions with their corresponding archetypal images, such as the king, queen, etc. By studying typology and the structures of both masculine and feminine archetypes, it became clear to me that certain pieces of information align across different paradigms. So, for example, John Beebe discusses cultural attitudes that benefit an individual when they balance typically resistant to cooperation function slots. These opposing functions correspond to reflector functions. So introverted intuition and introverted sensation, NI and SI, TI and FI, for example. Interestingly, this mirrors Robert Moore's observation that archetypes like the lover and warrior don't mix easily, nor do the king and the magician. The same holds true for the feminine archetypes. So extroverted intuition and extroverted sensation, NE and SE, or FE and TE. Surely, it's not by chance that the masculine and feminine principles, which align with introverted and extroverted functions, also correspond to function slots across all 16 personality types and take the exact same path of development. This alignment prompted me to re-examine the cognitive functions and their archetypal descriptions. After cross-referencing Psychological Types by Jung, Energies and Patterns by John Beebe, Archetypal Dimensions of the Psyche by Marie-Louise von Franz, Robert Moore's work, all his books with Douglas Gillette, and Tony Wolf's work, everything checked out. Each archetype aligned beautifully within typology structure. Had Robert Moore been a typologist, I believe he would have figured it out sooner. However, the main challenge of identifying archetypes, especially in oneself, is that the higher in consciousness the archetype is positioned, the more differentiated it is in awareness. And the lower the archetype is in the 8-function cognitive stack, the less differentiated it is in awareness. That means that in lower levels of competency and awareness, the functions and archetypes will tend to be conflated with one another. So to give you an example, while a magician may also use intuition, in reality, he's primarily tuned into the feeling atmosphere rather than precognitive insights. He's relying on the feeling function to decide what information can and should be brought into consciousness. Through emotional attunement, magicians can instigate the process of receiving insights through the energetic atmosphere. Yet it's the formation of an image that transitions these insights from the magician's realm of feeling into the creative realm of intuition. Once something can be imagined, it's no longer a formless energy, but has entered into symbolic awareness. Furthermore, with those with a high degree of knowledge and competency may seamlessly blend archetypes due to the way these energies cooperate rather than operate in isolation. Each archetype is constantly interacting with others, forming a network of interdependent functions. This interplay means that we almost never rely on a single archetype in its pure form. Instead, we engage with a constellation of archetypes working in tandem. This natural interweaving can make it difficult to distinguish one archetype's function from another, leading to understandable conflations and confusions. These factors may explain why archetypal structures and their alignments with cognitive functions have remained unidentified until now. But this model opens the door to deeper understanding. My favorite part of this research is that it makes the archetypes more accessible while also demystifying typology. After all, this is exactly what archetypal images are meant to do. They've been passed down through generations because they help us understand complex psychological processes in ways that feel tangible and real. And when we can see these processes clearly, they become something we can relate to and apply in our daily lives, empowering us to act with greater agency and integrity. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the 4 couples within. So, the King and Queen archetypes. They are represented by introverted thinking and extroverted thinking, and they form a powerful alliance that balances internal consistency with external structure, embodying a synergy that fosters growth, stability, and flourishing. Together, they provide the internal architecture and external application necessary for true generativity. The King archetype is not only the internal architect of logical consistency, but also serves as the regulating force that brings cohesion to the whole self. This King within holds each part of the psyche to an internal standard of integrity and coherence, ensuring that all archetypal energies, whether rooted in sensation, intuition, or feeling, align with a unified structure that supports the person's core values and truth. Because the King sees the inherent dignity and potential within, cultivating an inner calm and stability, he is able to hold space for others to grow into their fullness. He provides an inner authority, silently directing each drive and insight to integrate into a cohesive whole. In contrast, the Queen archetype, embodying TE, takes this codified structure and applies it to the external world. While the King harmonizes order within, the Queen ensures that this order extends outward, manifesting through practical stewardship and active organization of her environment. She is the gardener, aligning each element, water, soil, sunlight, to nurture a seed's growth into the world. Her energy is action-oriented, affirming and supporting the aspirations of those around her through tangible means. The queen actively arranges the conditions for flourishing, making sure that each element is in the right place and sequence to maximize vitality and protect against chaos. And this is an example of where one of the stereotypes gets confronted. Order versus chaos, right? But what we see here is that TE is an integral part of order and organizing structure. This is where certain TE women get unfairly hit in their egos and accused of being masculine, when in fact they are being feminine. So let me give you an analogy. This is a seed analogy. Imagine a seed waiting its potential to bloom. Merely possessing soil, water, sunlight, and the seed itself are not enough. That's what TI does for us. It says you need these things. These elements must be arranged with care. So the king energy provides the protected internal conditions that allow the seed to take root, while the queen's energy arranges the external elements, ensuring the seed is nestled within the soil where it can absorb nourishment and grow without disruption. True flourishing requires not only the right resources, but their careful alignment within a harmonious, supportive structure. So if the seed is exposed, a bird may eat it before it can grow. If the soil is too dry, the seed may not sprout. If the young plant is unprotected, it may wither under harsh conditions. The king and queen have distinct energetic manifestations. King energy is inwardly focused, cultivating a steady, stable core. He embodies an internal consistency that honors others' dignity and promotes inner integrity. His authority is reflective and rooted in inner order. Through the king's reliable hand, others feel secure to grow and express their unique talents, confident in the supportive structure that upholds them. Queen energy is outwardly directed, engaging actively with the environment. Her authority is practical, ensuring that resources, tasks, and goals are managed in a way that nurtures and empowers others. She is supportive. She's a supportive force who clears paths, removes obstacles, and provides what is needed for growth to thrive in the real world. Her guidance is visible, her actions are measurable, as she applies the king's internal principles to external form. Together, the king and queen create an environment where life can flourish, each fulfilling a vital role in nurturing growth. The king provides the inner foundation, safeguarding the essence and stability needed for potential to unfold, while the queen arranges the external elements, ensuring every piece is in its rightful place to support that growth. Their energies complement and sustain one another, forming a harmonious system where internal coherence meets external structure. This synergy brings forth vitality and the blessings of abundance, productivity, and generative power, whether through creativity, reproduction, or intellectual achievement. So next we're going to look at the warrior couple. The warrior and Amazon archetypes, representing introverted sensation and extroverted sensation, embody complementary energies that provide essential tools for navigating both internal and external dynamics, including challenges, balance, presence, and self-management. The Amazon, with her acute focus on the present moment and quick reflexes, moves fluidly through life, ready to adapt and act instantly. This present-mindedness complements the warrior's strategic approach, which draws on training, self-discipline, and a clear understanding of the consequences learned from past experiences. Together, they form a dynamic pair in which the Amazon's readiness and the warrior's prudence blend to manage conflict while upholding integrity and a sense of mature responsibility. The energy of both archetypes serves to enforce boundaries against inner impulses and external pressures. By defending personal integrity, they contribute to collective stability grounded in shared values and commitments. The warrior in particular embodies the power of self-restraint, using discipline to stay aligned with personal and transpersonal principles. Here's an example of the warrior couple in relationship. So, someone channeling warrior energy might rely on self-awareness and respect for their relationship to resist the temptation of infidelity. This commitment to self-control reflects a conscious choice to uphold personal and relational integrity rather than giving in to fleeting desires, which may be particularly compelling for Amazon energy, with its natural drive for the enjoyment in the moment. The warrior and Amazon have distinct energetic manifestations. Warrior energy is marked by a strong physiological awareness, meticulous attention to detail, and a humble acknowledgement of personal limitations. By recognizing these limits, the warrior makes strategic decisions that honor his endurance and skills, drawing on a lifetime of observing how actions lead to outcomes. This grounded perspective provides a solid foundation of practical wisdom, guiding him to act in ways that honor his own well-being and support the continuity of collective traditions. In contrast, Amazon energy thrives on active physical engagement and direct interaction with the immediate environment. She adapts seamlessly to what is in front of her, evaluating risks and rewards with a sharp, present-focused awareness. Her natural impulse propels her to take decisive action, pushing towards advancement. In moments of uncertainty, the Amazon trusts her instincts, embodying the power of swift, unhesitating resolve. Together, the Amazon and warrior archetypes balance each other, with one anchored in direct action and the other in strategic forethought. This union of energies allows them to meet challenges with a blend of agility and stability, promoting integrity and resilience within themselves and the communities they serve. By integrating the Amazon's immediate responsiveness with the warrior's disciplined restraint, they embody a balanced approach that respects individual values and upholds collective principles. The wise man and wise woman archetypes, representing introverted feeling and extroverted feeling, embody a profound awareness of the unseen, the unconscious, the repressed and suppressed aspects of the personal psyche and the collective psychic atmosphere. Both archetypes hold the unique ability to assess what insights and truths should be acknowledged or shared, carefully judging which knowledge will serve to deepen self-awareness or aid others in growth. This process of applied knowledge, knowing not only what is true, but discerning what is relevant and beneficial, is at the heart of wisdom, distinguishing these archetypes as mediators between the conscious and unconscious realms. While both are attuned to unseen truths, Fi and Fe express wisdom through distinct but complementary pathways. Fi through alignment with personal values, and Fe through fostering social cohesion and collective understanding. A critical role of the wise man and wise woman archetypes is to support individuals through initiation, the transformative process that reveals deeper truths and instigates significant inner change. As mentors, they help the individual navigate this passage so that they do not become compulsively driven by newfound insights or powerful energies. Instead, these archetypes foster a balanced reintegration, encouraging the person to return to everyday life with wisdom and maturity, rather than acting out their new understanding in extreme or destabilizing ways. The wise man, grounded in Fi, emphasizes alignment with authentic values as the author through this transition, while the wise woman, attuned to Fe, helps the individual reconnect with the collective in a harmonious and grounded way. This guidance allows the person to embody their transformation sustainably, contributing positively to their life and relationships. So I'm going to give you an example. One such transformation is the major break phase initiation into adulthood. The wise man and wise woman apply their judgment to guide others through critical developmental phases. During a young adult's first break phase, which is the period when they can leave their family home and recognize differences in values between themselves and their family of origin. The young adult may realize that to survive within their family, they had to repress certain personal values. This period serves as an initiation into adulthood, a transformative experience requiring careful guidance to integrate new values and perspectives. Over time, the psychic energy from the repression can lead to a compensatory focus on the family's shortcomings or neglect. A therapist embodying the wise woman archetype would understand that the truth likely lies between these feelings of compensation and repression. Like, for example, the person who just got out of their family and is seeing they had to repress certain parts of themselves, they're going to overly see their family as negative, and it may be true that they were neglected, but it may not be as bad. However, wisdom and experience would prevent her, the wise woman, from dismissing the young adult's experience with a remark like, "It's not that bad." Instead, the wise woman supports the young adult by fostering an emotional space where they can safely identify their own true values. She helps them establish healthy boundaries and distance themselves from being compulsively overtaken by family dynamics, using these new values to build a stable, authentic value system. The ideal outcome is that the young adult can reconnect with their family of origin in a sustainable way, without needing to be emotionally cut off from them. The wise man and wise woman have distinct energetic manifestations. The wise man uses an internal, value-based lens to determine the acceptability of a value, or conversely, whether it should be rejected. He prioritizes inner integrity, ensuring that personal beliefs and ethical standards uphold personal dignity. He creates distance when necessary to allow space for self-clarity, guiding individuals toward understanding their own values. And he seeks alignment between values and actions, ensuring that behavior authentically reflects personal beliefs and commitments. The wise woman operates from an external attunement to the emotional climate. She seeks harmony and validation in interpersonal contexts, aiming for communal stability. She selectively engages with groups and individuals to encourage environments where feelings can be openly expressed and validated. She judges which insights are ready to be brought into awareness to increase understanding of a situation, focusing on group well-being. The wise man and wise woman archetypes bring complementary forms of wisdom that benefit both individual and collective development, where the wise man sharpens and refines inner integrity, offering guidance rooted in deeply personal values that uphold dignity and character. The wise woman fosters cohesion, bridging hidden emotional currents with conscious awareness for collective harmony. Together, they reflect the dual nature of wisdom, discernment grounded in personal authenticity and relational resonance, essential for a balanced and compassionate approach to life. Next, we have the lovers. The lover archetype is attuned to life's creative and libidinal force, recognizing, becoming conscious of, and harnessing when possible this energy that fuels existence. Through the intuitive functions of NI and NE, the lovers have the potential to perceive life's depth and possibilities. Both masculine and feminine lover energies are driven by awe and significance, though they may approach this awareness differently. The masculine lover finds meaning in differentiation, exploring existence through contrast and introspection. For example, recognizing the immensity of the solar system compared to a human life evokes a sense of awe, highlighting the vastness beyond human scale and the unique roles we play within it, providing insight into what is already created. In contrast, the feminine lover celebrates the creation of new possibilities, viewing each moment as an opportunity to co-create meaning with others. This energy embraces unity as a form of unfolding potential, intuitively discovering beauty in connection and the endless possibilities it generates. While both lover energies are attuned to life's mysteries, NI reveres the significance within separation, whereas NE delights in unity's dynamic and evolving nature. The universal response of awe, like the AW, awe, illustrates the lover's sensitivity to both beauty and suffering. So imagine the soft awe we express upon seeing a baby's first steps, and a sound of pure delight and admiration for the innocence and wonder of new growth. Contrast this with the gentle "aw" we murmur upon hearing someone's story of loss, a compassionate recognition of another's pain. Both expressions come from the same intuitive impulse to acknowledge significance, whether in joy or sorrow. The lover archetype embraces this duality, using intuition to remain open to the full range of life's emotional and experiential depth. The lovers have distinct energetic manifestations. The masculine lover seeks depth and insight through differentiation, finding awe in recognizing life's significance. He views relationships as opportunities for reflections of self-awareness and deeper understanding of personal meaning. He's inspired through spontaneous internal revelation, perceives insights through symbolic images and abstract ideas, independently from each other. He cultivates contemplative understanding, valuing self-intimacy and reverence for the depth of existence. The feminine lover seeks expansive potential through connections, engaging in a merging of identities where each person's boundaries soften, fostering a mutual immersion that transcends individual significance. She views relationships as spaces for co-creation and mutual discovery, energized by the potential of each moment. She experiences awe through interconnected insights, intuitively recognizing beauty in the connections that bring emerging potentials to life. She inspires others to explore life's unfolding possibilities, fostering curiosity and fascination with an interaction's unique potential. Together, the masculine and feminine lover archetypes illustrate the depth and breadth of life's libidinal energy, showing how love, creativity, and spirituality emerge through both internal insight and relational immersion. Whether contemplating the significance of what is or creating new possibilities from what could be, the lovers bring us closer to understanding life's richness and the intimate knowing that fuels interconnectedness. Through their distinct expressions, the lover archetypes inspire us to recognize and honor both the beauty and suffering inherent in life, enriching our journey toward meaning and wholeness. So that is the end of the Jungian archetypes. Now I wanted to talk about some misconceptions, because a lot of us are coming into our understanding of the archetypes from a very different frame. So what I wanted to do is dispel some of the misconceptions based on authentic Jungian literature. So, misconception number 1. Am I being selfish if I spend my perception on myself? Each mode of consciousness requires a subject-related and object-related, or introverted and extroverted balance of expression to reach wholeness or maturity. The roles women play as dutiful daughters, mothers, and wives can lead to a people-pleasing epidemic where we prioritize others above ourselves. It's our responsibility as mature women to not sacrifice ourselves in our endeavor to care for our loved ones. It's especially important to not overfunction for others so that they do not have to bear the discomfort that comes along with necessary psychological growth. We need to understand our own needs and values so that we can maintain boundaries that protect our well-being, not only for ourselves, but to demonstrate to others what valuing yourself looks like, modeling behavior that will foster and enable our children to learn how to recognize the way they deserve to be nurtured through self-care and self-respect. This is not selfish. This is demonstrating self. Misconception number 2. Am I being masculine if I have boundaries with my partner? So among all of Zach Rhodes' work, if you've read his work, the principle of abdicating boundaries is quite possibly the most destructive and regression-inducing attack on the selfhood of a person. Instead of honoring one's own visceral connection to our physiology, it asks for a sacrifice to be made to an intimate partner's psychosomatic experience. We are not children. We are adult women. Your instincts, needs, gut feelings, and intuitions are there to protect you. If you dismiss them, you will soon find yourself in a vulnerable position with someone who either openly or unknowingly allows you to abandon yourself. There is no virtue in trying to force yourself into a childlike naivety. That puts you in danger because you are no longer a child. You can't go into adult situations with the regressed state of a child's mind, no matter how badly you want to, no matter how burnt out and looking for relief you are, not even if your childhood was taken from you and you didn't get to live that safety then. There is only forward, there is only now and what's coming. This is not being masculine. This is having personal, spiritual, physical, and psychological integrity. Now, it may not be feasible to avoid getting into relationships until you are perfectly aware of all your needs and boundaries, but you need to at least be in a position where you know enough about yourself to be able to figure it out when you get those internal signals and are able to express yourself honestly when something feels like it's infringing on your personhood. Healthy anger often arises when personal boundaries are crossed. Anger in this sense is a natural emotional response, signaling that something important to you, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, has been violated or disregarded. This type of anger serves as an internal alert, prompting you to recognize that a boundary needs to be addressed or reinforced. If you suppress it, the anger that builds as a result of not being in touch with your body can lead to autoimmune disease, resentment, displaced and disproportionate lashing out, and even internal numbness or lifelessness. And misconception number 3. Are women worse at decision making? In Psychological Types, Carl Jung writes, quote, "That is why I call the perception types irrational by nature, but merely because they subordinate judgment to perception, it would be quite wrong to regard them as unreasonable. It would be truer to say that they are in the highest degree empirical. They base themselves exclusively on experience, so exclusively that, as a rule, their judgment cannot keep pace with their experience." Unquote. So this insight into perception and judgment sheds light on the essence of masculinity and femininity. From an early age, women often show a natural openness to external data, aligning more easily with objective ideas and people. This means that a woman's judgments typically draw from a wider range of experiences and insights, adapting as new data reveals additional nuances or perspectives. As a result, her decisions may evolve with the addition of each new piece of information, especially if it offers new insight. Men, on the other hand, tend to adopt a more differentiated and independent stance, often making them less inclined to re-examine their views with each new piece of information. This difference introduces the concepts of frame, which is maintaining a consistent viewpoint, versus adapting to fit the frame, or shaping perspectives based on incoming data. Men may find it psychologically harder to absorb new information, as their natural independence can make adaptability a greater challenge. While both men and women may struggle with decision-making, they face distinct challenges. Women often contend with an influx of information and the need to discern key insights, while men may need to work towards greater openness and adaptability when new perspectives arise. In 2021, I hypothesized that what Rollo Tomasi actually meant by saying women were more intuitive and men were more rational was that women were more perceiving and men were more judging. We now know that this is incorrect. I would like now to update this to reflect what's actually going on in that dynamic, a view supported by the broad range of evidence we've explored in this presentation today. Feminine energy is more open to external influence, while masculine energy finds comfort in internal continuity. Great decision-making ultimately requires a balance of both energies. And that is the end of the presentation. So if